Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. In this episode, I speak to Marcus Mucha, great-grandson of the world-famous Czech painter, illustrator and graphic artist Alphonse Mucha. Marcus, who's in his mid-40s, was born in the UK and is today executive director of the Mucha Foundation, which preserves and promotes the work of the world-renowned Art Nouveau pioneer. When we spoke at its recently opened Mucha Museum in the heart of Prague, the conversation took in a wide range of topics, including Marcus's previous career as a Hollywood producer and the story of how a Nazi officer protected his Jewish great-grandmother, Alphonse's wife. And all that's in this edition of Prague Talk. How Czech did you feel growing up?
You know, I was always aware of it, and we managed to sneak back in a couple of times before the wall came down in 1984 and 1989. And it was always something that I felt as part of my heritage. But at that time, it was, in the UK, it was this kind of exotic, far-off land. The Berlin Wall was still up, and it was part of Ronald Reagan's evil empire. And so it felt very distant. And then, once the wall came down, my dad was on the first flight back here. We spent a lot more time here, and I started eating Czech bread and felt that it tapped into something really deep in my kind of ancestral roots. And then a little later, I had my first taste of Pilsen and felt something very similar. So, yeah, I guess in London in the 80s, there was some kind of piece of exotic background. But then as soon as the wall came down, I mean, we were back a lot and feeling very, very Czech indeed.
When you came here in the 80s, did you stay at your family's famous apartment opposite Prague Castle?
Yeah, that's right. I slept as a little boy in the bed where Count Waldstein was murdered. And him being murdered in that bed wasn't actually that scary for me. What was scary is that the duvet was a bear skin. So imagine being a little boy waking up next to a ferocious bear's head. That was scary for me.
And was your grandfather Jiří still alive in those days?
Yeah, he was. I only met him 3 or 4 times, and I just remember him being a very kind and gentle man.
And your granny was Scottish, Geraldine?
That's right, yeah. We spent more time with her. She was able to get out to the UK more often because she had a British passport. And so we would spend summers with her up at her house in Scotland. She found Prague too stifling and too hot in the summer, which I can appreciate, and so would try to get away to her Scottish roots.
At what point did you realise that you had an ancestor who was a world-famous artist?
You know, what's interesting is that when I was growing up, he wasn't really a world-famous artist, certainly not in the West. A lot of his work had been hidden away and forgotten behind the Iron Curtain. When he went to America in 1904 for the first time, he was greeted by a cutout of himself on the dock in New York, proclaiming him Alphonse Mucha, the world's greatest artist. But because of the sad history of the 20th century in the Czech lands, his artistic achievement, or much of his artistic achievement, was forgotten. And so it's as if Toulouse-Lautrec was only known for the posters he did in Paris and not for the thoughtful oil paintings on which so much of his artistic legacy rests. One of the great privileges of the work that we do and what we're doing here with the new Mucha Museum in the Savarin Palace on Nápři Kopě in the heart of Prague is to reintroduce particularly the Western art historical establishment to an artist who is really perhaps underappreciated. He was arguably the creator of the world's first truly global artistic movement in Art Nouveau. His work, not only as an artist, but also as a utopian philosopher, is really important. And it's a great privilege for us to be able to wake up every day and share his vision with the wider world.
In your 20s, Marcus, you went to Hollywood, where you were a producer. What drew you to the world of movies?
So I was living in London at the time and was trying to be a writer-director. And I was having little snippets of success in London, But the future, as it was kind of set out to me, was that maybe if I was lucky, I could direct an episode of a soap opera, and then maybe 10 years down the line, I could do a movie with a $100,000 budget. And I thought, screw this, I want to do James Bond movies. So I moved out to Hollywood with a suitcase and a dream. And I quickly found that there were a lot of other people who were wanting to be directors, a lot of people who were directors as well. Many of them were much, much more talented than me, and most of them were unemployed. So I switched over to the business side of the business. I managed to get a position in the mailroom at International Creative Management, one of the big talent agencies, and I worked my way up there. Subsequently, I was headhunted by Morgan Freeman and his producing partner, Laurie McCreary, to run the business side of their production company. And Morgan and Laurie were very generous. They gave me a lot of rope to hang myself, and we were able to do some pretty cool things even while I was still relatively young.
Everyone listening to this will be thinking, what is Morgan Freeman actually like at the personal level?
He's the most amazing guy. I can't imagine being any more lucky than I was to work with Morgan and Laurie. They were a really great team. Morgan is really full of integrity. He's got a very strong point of view, but he's also just really fun to be around. I remember when my older son met him for the first time when he was a baby. It was a party at Morgan's house, and my son was in that stranger danger phase. And so usually he'd see somebody else and he'd kind of burst into tears. But as soon as he first saw Morgan, like instinctively, he just lit up and started stuffing burgers in Morgan's mouth. Morgan was on I think a gluten-free diet at the time, so he shouldn't really have been doing it, but he made an accommodation for the little boy.
So what led you to abandon the glamorous world of Hollywood?
When my grandfather Jiří passed away in 1991, my parents, John and Sarah, and my grandmother Geraldine established the Mucha Foundation. That's a Czech non-profit which serves to introduce people around the world to Mucha's work and to preserve the Mucha family collection. And my dad came out to visit my family and I in Hollywood, or in Santa Monica, and he said that he was planning to retire soon, and that would we consider uprooting our young family and moving back to Europe to continue this work. And for a second, it was a pretty hard decision. My wife and I both had relatively successful careers as producers in Hollywood. I'd just been listed in Variety, which is the trade magazine of the entertainment industry, as one of the best producers under the age of 35, literally a couple of weeks before my dad came out. And so the future looked pretty bright for us in Hollywood, not to mention that all my wife's family were there, close at hand. Our kids were born there. But after about 20 minutes of talking about it, we were pretty clear that this was what we had to do. I mean, it's in my blood, it's in my bones, it's in my heart. There really wasn't any alternative. So we went out. I went out there with a suitcase and a dream, and I came back with a shipping container, 100 boxes, a wife and 2 kids.
We're here, of course, at the Mucha Museum. How much of the foundation's energy is focused on work here in Czechia, and how much on your international work? Because I know you do a lot of traveling exhibitions.
Alphonse thought his work was a universal benefit for humanity. He wanted it to be seen by as many people as possible. And so we try to do that as much as we can through our own programs, whether that's our exhibition program or this museum or our commercial licensing programs or our other educational programs. And we're fortunate that we enjoy a deep collection. The Mucha family collection is over 11,000 artworks, and we are able to present them in exceptional museums around the world. So in recent years, we've done shows at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney. We've just closed a show at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. So yeah, that's a big part of our focus. But what's really exciting for us about this new museum here in the heart of Prague is that while in the last 30 years we've been able to share a narrative around the world with this wider understanding of Mucha's work, of not just the posters that are a part of our collective subconscious wherever we come from, but also the works leading up to those and the latter part of his career where he put his talents in the service of his new Czechoslovak nation. So we've been able to share that with about 6.5 million people around the world over the years. About 500,000 people a year see our exhibitions at the moment. But we've not really had a permanent way to present that to the Czech public. We were lucky a few years ago when President Vystrčil of the Czech Senate invited us to do an exhibition at the Waldstein Riding School as the cultural centerpiece of the Czech rotating presidency of the European Union. And there we were able to present such an exhibition. But unfortunately, the Czech presidency only lasted 6 months, and so the exhibition only lasted that long, and so it was a temporary thing. And so we're really thrilled that now we've been able to move into this incredible space here. Alphonse also was a great admirer of Mozart. If you look out the windows here, you're directly opposite the theatre where Mozart conducted the world premiere of Don Giovanni. And so I think for him to have imagined that his work would be in such an exquisite location would have made him incredibly happy.
How much do you feel that you are kind of growing his brand, or are you simply trying to maintain it at the high level it's at already?
No, I mean, we strongly believe that there's still a gap between how he was perceived when he first arrived in New York as one of the greatest artists in the world and where he is today. We think that because of the technology of the time, both the lithograph and the means of transportation that there were, his work was able to diffuse through the world very soon after it was created, and that made his style the first really global artistic style. I mean, he was also the father, I think, of modern advertising, and one of the first people who realized that when you're doing a poster for a product, you're not selling that product, you're selling a dream. And one of the other aspects that I think is really interesting and where we've focused in some of our recent touring exhibitions is that his work really influenced all sorts of generations of artists who came after him. I think a big reason for that is because while his work might not have found space in the artistic mainstream narrative in the West in the second half of the 20th century, Alphonse grew up as a discriminated against minority in Austro-Hungary. And so there's something ethical as well as the aesthetic of it that speaks to freedom. And you can see that in the free and empowered women in his work. But I think it's something that taps deeper than that. And so what's been really exciting for us as we've researched it in recent years and become friends with a lot of these people is to find other artists who have also, for whatever reason, been marginalized and ignored by the mainstream Western art historical narrative. And those people who found something in Mucha's work. I'm thinking, for example, of the female manga artists in Japan in the 1970s, where at that time manga was very much a boys' club. It was really, really hard to break into. And the comics that were made for women were pretty boring. It was like, here's a nice salary man, marry him, pop out a couple of kids, and you can have a life of making bento boxes. Whereas the pioneering artists like Hideko Nakano, who came in and started working in that space, they were like, you know what? If you want to have an affair with a rock star, that's a valid life choice as well. Go for it. And they combined Mucha's aesthetic line with the kind of broader ethical cry for freedom that's in his work. The other guy who I think is amazing for this is Joe Quesada. He's a Cuban-American, originally a comic book artist, doing comic books for Marvel. And he worked his way up at Marvel until he recently stepped down from his role as chief creative officer of the entire Marvel Entertainment Group, so responsible for the whole artistic direction of all of the Marvel multi-character universe, all of the comic books, all of the TV shows, all of the movies. And again, like Mucha was such a kind of seminal influence on his work. So from the covers of the X-Men, where you see Wolverine done in the style of a Mucha lithograph, through to at the end of his career, where the ethical universe that the characters in the Avengers movies inhabit is so much richer and so much more complex and so much more philosophically deep than the superhero world when I was watching superhero movies as a kid.
What's the greatest misconception about Alphonse Mucha? Is it that he's French?
I mean, that's one of them. I admire our friends in France who've managed to appropriate such great French artists as Chopin and Van Gogh and Picasso, as well as Mucha. I wonder if we might do the same here and appropriate Mozart and Beethoven and Mahler and claim them as Czech composers. But I think the main misconception, which is one of the main reasons why my father started the foundation, was, as my father puts it, I wanted to dynamite the notion that Mucha was just an affichiste. And so, like, to really tell the story beyond the posters that everybody knows, everybody loves. Obviously, we want to show them, and like the selection we've got here, they're ones that Alphonse rolled up as soon as they were off the presses, so the colours are just as fresh as they were in Paris in the 1890s, and I think that's really unique for any collection of his posters anywhere in the world. Obviously, we want to show those, and we want to show these images that people love, but we want to tell a much richer story of Mucha and his importance as an artist and a philosopher.
Is there much Bohemian or Moravian influence on his work?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at this poster for Gismonde, which was the first one that he did when he first moved to Paris and got his big break with Sarah Bernhardt, if you look behind her face, there's a kind of halo shape, and in that halo is a Byzantine cross. And for Alphonse, the Byzantine church was a symbol of Slavic culture. So here, even in the first poster of Alphonse's Paris period, you can see the roots of what will eventually become the Slav epic. And all through these posters, like Reverie, for example, here, which is seen as kind of an icon of Parisian Art Nouveau, where the lines and the shapes of it are woven into the scenography of Paris, even today. This is a very Moravian picture. The structure of the lithograph very closely echoes a painting of the Virgin Mary that Alphonse saw in his local church in Ivančice growing up as a choir boy. And the flowers that surround the female figure, they're the same flowers that Alphonse saw in the fields and the forests of Moravia in the spring. And the clothes she's wearing are the same folk clothes that Alphonse would see the girls wearing in his village on festive days. So imbued deep into the DNA of Parisian Art Nouveau is a strong Moravian element.
I guess, obviously, his greatest work in that area was the Slav epic. It's now in Moravský Krumlov. He donated the series of paintings to the city of Prague in 1928. What is your organization's relationship to those works?
As a family and as a foundation, we consider the Slav epic to be Alphonse's late great masterpiece. And we are really excited that in a few short years, just a stone throws from here in another part of the Savarin complex, the world-renowned architect Thomas Heatherwick, who recently built a little island off the coast of Manhattan and is currently building Google's new headquarters in Mountain View, California. Also for Londoners, he did the new beautiful buses that go around London. He was inspired by Mucha as a student, and so he's really thrilled to be doing his first ever building in the European Union here as the permanent purpose-built hall for the Slav epic that Alphonse envisioned, in line with Alphonse's original stipulations in the gift to the city of Prague. We're really thrilled that that's going to be here, and we can't wait to welcome people both from the Czech lands and from around the world to come and see that. But in the meantime, we're also thrilled that it's in Moravský Krumlov. The city of Moravský Krumlov looked after the epic. The city and the people looked after the epic, along with our family, through the darkest days of the 20th century when, for example, the first communist minister of culture sought to have the Slav epic destroyed. And so without the people and the town of Moravský Krumlov, the Slav epic would not exist today. Alphonse's vision was that the Slav epic would always be here in Prague so that people from around the world could come and see it and appreciate the role of the Czech peoples and also the Slavic peoples in general to the universal world peace that he saw as just around the corner. But until that purpose-built hall that Tom Heatherwick's building for us is ready, we wouldn't want it anywhere else but in Moravský Krumlov.
Will the Slav epic definitely be here in 3 years' time? Or are there still some outstanding legal questions surrounding it?
We've signed an agreement with the mayor of Prague that settles litigation that my father had with the city and that stipulates that it's going to be placed in the Savarin complex. I understand that a lot of people want it, but as a family and as a foundation, we like to follow contracts and we're really looking forward to the Slav epic being here. At the same time, please come and see our museum. We talk about the Slav epic here. It's not here yet, but we show a range of original studies from it, some of which we're showing publicly for the first time ever, and we tell a story about it so that when it does come here to Prague, people are going to know more about it and appreciate it in a way that they wouldn't have done before.
We spoke previously, and you told me that you have a great idea, I think, to bring school kids to Prague on a special Mucha bus in future.
That's right. I mean, one of the things where we're currently soliciting sponsorship is to have such a bus. The vision we have is that every school child at some point in their upbringing will be able to come to Prague and to enjoy the Mucha Museum, also the Slav epic once it's here, and to see how a boy from a small village in Moravia could go on and influence the way that the world looks around us, even now, 165 years after he was born. Already we have an initiative where, we're not open to the public yet, but you'll see once the doors open, it's going to be busy here with school groups. We've got school groups coming through every day. As part of our educational program, we're giving free entry to organize school tours so that all the children in Prague can come here for free and really appreciate Alphonse's work and his achievement.
Just a few streets from here in the center of Prague is the Peček Palace, which was the headquarters of the Gestapo during World War II and during the Nazi occupation. Alphonse was interrogated there and died a few months later. Why did the Nazis target him?
So there are a number of reasons for that. First was that he was the de facto national artist, and he had a strong sense of Czechoslovak national identity. And that was at odds with Hitler's vision for the Czech and Moravian lands as being part of a greater German Reich. Second was that his wife, my great-grandmother, was Jewish. But third, and perhaps most importantly, was that Alphonse was a prominent Freemason. He was, in fact, the head of the Czech Freemasons. Among the many things that the Nazis hated, Freemasonry was one of them. The Freemasonry is one of the aspects that we really lean into here in the new museum, and as part of the kind of bridge between the Paris period and the section about the Slav epic, it's one of the first places where he really crystallized his idea that all of the religions and all of the countries around the world have something to contribute to a kind of synthetic identity that leans towards universal world peace. And also on the Freemasons, we had a very sinister moment a few years ago where somebody we know found a handwritten note in some archives in Berlin in Goebbels' handwriting. And it was a list of the Masons that he wanted to get, and Alphonse was on that list. So not nice when you see your family name in Goebbels' handwriting.
Was there also a story that some Nazi saved your great-grandmother's life?
That's right. I mean, it's an extraordinary story that... So Alphonse had a villa in the Bubenec district in Prague where he lived and had his studio, and a high-ranking officer of the Wehrmacht took over that house during the war. And he knew that my great-grandmother was Jewish and that my great-aunt was Jewish, and he protected them and protected the collection through the war. And there's a beautiful coda to that story, which is that in the 1970s, my grandfather Jiří organized an exhibition in Frankfurt. And when he was opening it, an elderly gentleman came up to him and introduced himself. And it was, in fact, this officer from the Wehrmacht. And so my grandfather took him through the exhibition and talked to him about it and asked him which was his favorite. And the gentleman said, well, I really like this poster because this is something that I had in my study. I know that you were fighting in the Royal Air Force. I was fighting on the Eastern Front. But when I was on leave and I could come home, this was something that reminds me of happy times with my family in your family's house and in your family's gardens. And so at the end of the show, my grandfather gave that work to him.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I believe also the Nazis tried to ban a funeral for Alphonse, but people turned out anyway in great numbers.
That's almost right. So my great-grandmother petitioned the Protectorate to ask if the family might be able to bury Alphonse in the National Monument in the Slavine at Vyšehrad. And somewhat surprisingly, the Nazis said yes, but on the condition that only the immediate family turned up. And we think that was because my grandfather, who was a prominent young Czech Jew, had already fled to France and had joined the Foreign Legion. And we think that they wanted him to come back so they could seize him, and then I wouldn't be here today. My grandfather did come back, but rather than listening to the Nazis, the regular Czech people, over 100,000 of them, turned up and lined the streets of Prague to bid farewell to their national artist. And so my grandfather was able to slip in and slip out unnoticed. And that was one of the kind of last cries of freedom before the dark days of the Second World War here in Prague.
My final question, Marcus, is you know so many of Alphonse's works. You're really an expert on him. What is your favorite, either single work or period?
So I love the posters from the Czech period. They're really great because for me it's Alphonse using all the talent and all the skills that he developed in Paris, but applying them to something that's close to his heart and the new country of Czechoslovakia that he's helping to establish, and then he wants to give all his work in the service of his new country. In particular, for a personal reason, I really like the poster Princess Hyacinth. And the reason is that, as you mentioned, before I was doing this work, I was a producer in Los Angeles. And one day I had a phone call from a friend of mine who worked at Disney. And he said, "Hey, Marcus, you related to Alphonse Mucha?" And I said, "Yes, well, I'm his great-grandson." And he was really excited because they'd just started having concept art meetings for a new animated film that they were doing. And what they'd done is they'd taken the princess from Princess Hyacinth and put her in an ice palace. And so that was one of the first pieces of concept art for the movie that went on to become Frozen. And so if you watch Frozen again, with that in mind, you can see Mucha's artistic DNA in every snowflake, in every piece of furniture, in every banister in the palace. And I think that's really something special and something that we really treasure, is how great artists around the world, whether they're fine artists like Jiří David or Liu Bolin, or graphic artists like Joe Quesada, who I mentioned earlier, or Yoshitaka Amano, who is responsible for the Final Fantasy video games, or indeed the team at Disney who came up with Frozen, that they're still finding something in Mucha's artistic DNA that speaks to not only his beautiful aesthetic, but also his desire for freedom and for art to be a bridge between people of all nations.
Many thanks indeed to Marcus Mucha for speaking to me at the Mucha Museum for Prague Talk, a podcast produced by Radio Prague International. Our conversation was recorded in May 2025. If you enjoyed our chat and are new to the pod, why not search out some of the earlier episodes and, of course, subscribe wherever you get podcasts. But for now, that's all from me, Ian Willoughby. Thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very, very soon.